friends, well, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to show you how to restring a normal electric guitar. They do vary a little bit, but this will give you the general idea. Now the question might be, how often should you change the strings on your guitar? Well, with acoustic it's very important to change them regularly, a couple of months. They're a big part of the sound of your acoustic. With an electric, it's perhaps not quite so critical because it's the pickups and the amplifier that are producing the sound. However, old strings are much more difficult to keep their tune, and for the intonation, that is the accuracy of the notes all the way up the neck tends to go off a little bit. So professional musicians might change them every gig, but we can get a few months out of them, and I would say 6 months at the most, because you need to oil that fretboard at least twice a year. So I definitely wouldn't go longer than 6 months, and fresh strings will sound a lot better and hold the tune a lot better. So let's get back to the guitar. We're actually going to change today. I'm not going to change the strings on this one, been changed recently, and we'll see how to do it. Okay, and to make matters easier, because if we press down on the neck here, it's going to be very wobbly. I've made myself a little thing out of a bit of scrap wood. You could just put a cushion under it, whatever you like, just keeps it stable. And now the next job is to take the old strings off. Now I have one of these gadgets. It's a string winder, it's a pair of cutters, it's also a bridge pin puller. It's a handy little tool. It's Planet Waves, which is the Dario trademark. Now you can buy these on eBay. They're maybe £10-ish. There's lots of them selling cheaper than that, but they are fakes. They may say they're Planet Waves, they may say they're Dario, but they're fakes unless it has Planet Waves stamped into there. Let's see if I can get that in the light. You see it's stamped in to the body of the thing. If it doesn't have that on it, then it's a Chinese fake, and the string cutter wouldn't cut the skin off a rice pudding, so you don't want that. Do not buy those. They're cheap, but they're rubbish. They don't work. So worth spending this. It'll last you a lifetime. Spend a little bit of extra money. So this saves a lot of, I mean, you can just do it by hand if you want, but you get sort of wrist ache after a while. I'll just unwind the string. Some people like to cut the strings, but you've still got to unwind them even if you cut them. So I just tend to wind them right off. Be careful that you don't get the end of the string. It's extremely sharp, causes some nasty finger injuries. They bleed like crazy. You don't get any sympathy because you can't see a real wound, but it really hurts. So there you go. So I'll just unwind all those, loosen them all from that end, and we'll come back when we're finished. Okay, well, having detached all the strings from that end, we now have to push them down through these holes here, and they come out at the back of the guitar. So let's just turn it over, and you can see they go right through the body of the guitar and pulled out. Now, what quite often happens, exactly what's happened there, is that this little bit that's been bent around the tuning peg is going to get in the way. So it's quite a good idea to just cut it off so that we end up, get rid of that, so we end up with a nice straight end that pulls through very easily and cleanly. And there you go. Now, it's also the case that this plate sometimes adds to the difficulty of getting the strings threaded through, and it might be necessary to just undo these screws. Just take that plate off, and it covers this little chamber where the springs are for the tremolo system, but you don't have to do that. You might be able to get it through without. We'll see how we go. Okay, so I'll do that for each of the strings, cut the ends off, push them through, and we'll come back when that's finished. So yes, exactly what I said would happen has happened. The first two strings, two thinnest ones, proven a little bit difficult to get out, and I didn't actually string this guitar up. It's the first time I've restrung it since I bought it new. So these are the new strings, and sometimes they're in there a little bit too firmly and they get jammed. So it's better to just take this plate off. It gives us a bit more direct access. This is just a cavity where, as I said, where the springs are for the tremolo mechanism. I'm not using a tremolo. I don't really like the effect, and it tends to put your guitar out of tune if you're not careful. I suppose if it's a very expensive system it might not, but certainly on a basic entry level guitar like this it would. You can see I packed the chamber full of tissue. That's just to stop all kinds of extraneous noises that the springs make when you pick the guitar, and feeds through into the amplifier. So let's see what we can do about this. Well, the bullet end of the strings, that's this little bullet that's on the end. It stops the string from coming right through the hole. It's really jammed in there, so we're going to have to push it out. I'm using anything will do. It's a big paper clip, and just push it down in there and loosen that up. There you go. You know, it's not rocket science. You just have to mess about with it till you get it right. And see, I can push that one out as well. Yep. So it's quite easy to do, really. There you go. So now we've got all the strings off. Next thing to do is dispose of the old strings. So I wrap them up like that, wind them round. If you put them in the bin without that, they just spring out, back out of the bin again, basically. All right, get rid of those and then we'll come back again in a moment. All right, well, now for a bit of maintenance. Now, good idea when you've got the strings off, take a little socket. This is a 10mm, usually around there. Fits over this nut that's holding the tuning pegs on, and just make sure that those are tight, because they do get slack. Very slightly. They're pretty good, but it's worth giving them a check. Yeah, that's fine. And there's also a little screw in the end of each of these tuning mechanisms here, and I don't know if you can see that, and they decide how tight or how slack the you need to turn them, tighten this screw up, and you find it's really difficult to turn. Slacken it off a little bit. I can do that, and it just spins around. Well, you don't want either of those. You don't want it to be difficult, you don't want it spinning around. You want just a little bit of resistance. Now those are actually perfect as they are, so we just leave them alone, but it's worth checking. So the next thing to do would normally be to give the whole thing a good clean up. Now, we'll show you this more on the acoustic guitar, but normally you would want to use some oil. This is lemon oil. You could last forever. You can buy it anywhere online, and you normally just treat the fingerboard with the lemon oil. Just put it on, it cleans the fingerboard and it conditions it. I'm rubbing it off again because this fingerboard shouldn't be oiled. It's hard. If you have something like a maple kind of fingerboard, something like you get on Telecasters, this one has one of those fingerboards. It's hard wood and the oil won't soak in. It's probably finished a little bit on the surface as well. Feels a bit glossy and shiny. But most fingerboards are rosewood, and they're raw wood. They're not varnished or finished in any way. And so you do need to oil them to keep them from splitting, keep them in good condition, makes them look nice too and feel good. So I'll show you that when we do the acoustic guitar. This guitar doesn't need it, but if you have an electric with a rosewood fingerboard, you will need to do it. So you'll see it in that video. There's also a thing called guitar polish. again, which you can buy. You just put a little squirt of that on and rub it in and polish it. But again, this guitar has a sort of, we would call it satin finish, I think is the right word. So I don't want to polish it. It's not nitrocellulose lacquer, which most guitars are. So unfortunately I picked the wrong guitar for showing you how to do all that. So just to show you the sort of thing we're talking about, here we've got a guitar with a shiny finish, a lacquered finish. This is where you would use guitar polish. Don't use furniture polish. I used to use Pledge. It's not compatible with the nitrocellulose lacquer that you get on guitars. And here we've got a rosewood fingerboard. Now you can see that wood, it just looks porous. If I get it in the light, you can see actually this does need some oil. You can see all the dry patches on it. And if you oil that, it really comes up nicely. It feeds the wood, stops it from splitting. So that would be a rosewood fingerboard. If your guitar looks like that, then you definitely need to oil it. And I would say twice a year at least. So we're cleaned up, we've checked the tension on the tuning mechanisms, and we're ready to install the new set of strings. Now, before we go any further, let's just have a word about strings here. I'm using Ernie Ball. They're very popular. Most people use them, including professional musicians. I like them. They come in all kinds of various gauges and sizes. Now, strings are normally quoted as being a set which matches whatever the top string is, the thinnest string that goes on here. So these are what's called nines. In other words, the thinnest string is 9/1000ths of an inch thick. Sounds very small, and it is. And then they grade it down to 11, 16, 24, 32 and 42/1000ths of an inch for the thick bass string. So that's a set of nines. Tens are probably the most popular, but thicker strings have more tension because with them being thicker, they produce a lower note, and therefore you need to tighten the tuning peg more to raise the note back up to get it into pitch. So the string's very taut. It's difficult to bend, which you do on electric guitars a lot. Bend the notes, push the strings up harder on your fingers. So I prefer nines. Some people say you get better tone from tens. It's nonsense. You do not. The tone comes from your amplifier and it comes from your pickups. And Billy Gibbons, you know, ZZ Top, he uses sevens, which is so thin they're like a spider's web. They're ridiculous. But when he plays, he sounds like a dump truck driving through a nitroglycerin factory. So it's not heavier strings give you a heavier sound. They don't. So I prefer nines. It's up to you. You should experiment and find which ones you like. Now with Ernie Ball, the nines are called super slinky, the tens are called regular slinky, but there's also hybrid slinky, which means it have thin tops and heavy bottoms. There's all various sets. You can experiment with yourself. But I want to say something now about fake strings. Okay, I bought these 3 sets of strings for about £8 or £9 from eBay, which is amazing because they're normally that much for a single packet of strings. But they are fakes. They're very good fakes, but they're fakes and they're nowhere near as good as the original strings. Now, it's very hard to tell. I would suggest that you buy yourself a proper set of Ernie Ball strings from a reputable, guitar shop first before you start buying all this Chinese cheap rubbish off eBay. Keep the packet and then you'll be able to see what the difference is. Now, I don't know if you can see that, but these are genuine ones. The packet's much brighter. It's a very bright kind of luminescent purple colour, whereas the fakes are quite dull and almost blurry, kind of smoky finish to them. And that comes over very well. Great when they're on their own. Yes, they look fine. But when you compare them with the real thing, you can see the difference. Also, you'll notice that the holes are not properly punched out here on the fakes, which they are on the real ones. I also noticed that on the real strings, the heavy string, the bass string, 42,000 string, is at the front in the packet, whereas on the fakes, it's the thin string, the 9,000 string or the first string that's at the front of the packet. Plus these packets are very thin, and again, or they're not very white, they just feel cheap. Whereas the real Ernie Ball ones, the packets are nice and firm, crisp and very white. Also, you can tell when you get the real ones, if you press the packet, it doesn't really compress too much because it's very well sealed and the air doesn't go anywhere. When you press these ones, they're all squidgy, they're not well sealed, which is probably why they put grease in the strings. They do feel a bit greasy. It's just to preserve them because the air's got in there. And if I can show you, this is the most difficult one to tell, I suppose. But the ball end of the string, and you won't be able to see this on camera, I don't think. Let's see if I can get it a bit closer. The ball end of the string, let's see if I can get that in focus. It's very square shouldered on the fakes. And again, I don't think you can see, but if you have the real ones to compare them with, you should always have a set of real ones to compare them with. Whereas the ball end of the string on the real one, the shoulders are much more rounded, the edges. So there's a few ways to tell, but basically, if you're buying 3 sets of strings for what would normally be the price of one, then there's something wrong somewhere. Or as my mate used to say, there's a rabbit away somewhere. If nobody can sell 3 sets of Ernie balls for £8, it's impossible. That's what they cost each. So be careful. Fake ones are not as good. The real ones are the best. Okay, so now we've got them out of the packet. Got 9s are thin string, getting thicker, 11, 24, 32, and 42. Almost 16. Got them in the wrong order. Get them in the right order. 9, 11, 16, 24, 32, and 42. So that's our thick bass string. So we'll start with that one first. Now just take it out of the packet. Careful how you unwrap them. They do unwrap quite easily. If you're having trouble, you've done something wrong, just let them unwrap themselves, basically. Right, okay. And then what we've got to do is turn the guitar on its side. I'm trying to look and see if this is visible on the camera. Push the string through, make sure you're getting it in the right place. Okay, turn the guitar back over. You can see that string's coming through there. And pull it, snug it up into the back. And there we go. Now we'll go and have a look at what we do at the other end. Yeah, so what we want to do is line up the hole. There we go. Push the string through. And then we need a certain amount of slack. Make sure it's pulled up tight at the other end. And you want to go, well, in this case, maybe a tuning peg and a half, and put a good kink in the string. So I've gone to the middle of here, past that one and into the middle of there. And that's how much slack I want to allow on my string. And that forms a nice hook. So that now I can turn either by hand or using my string winding tool. And we want the winds to go underneath each other, not over the top, and just wind the string on. Now that might flip round and hit you in the eye, so push it up like that, just bend it and continue, whoops, continue to wind. And the winds are all going one under the other. I'm just guiding it with my fingers. Now time to put it in the slot. Okay, so the shape of that tuning peg is actually not a cylinder, it's a capstan. It looks like that. So it's narrow in the middle where the string goes through the hole. So as you wind, the winds going one underneath the other and one underneath the other, as the tension comes on the string, then the winds tend to pull up towards the center and nip each other together, and that's what's holding the string in place. Now, the other thing that's recommended for electric guitars particularly is this stuff. It's called nut sauce. It's a lubricant that you can put in the slots in the nut, and it enables the string to slide back and forward. Because when you're playing electric, you tend to bend strings a lot, and they go out of tune. You bend them up, it stretches this part, and it doesn't go back to where it was. So this allows the strings to get themselves back together. So what all you do is just take this the string out of the slot, squeeze a little bit of sauce in there, and you have some tools which can help you spread it and then put the string back in. Now, some people make their own. Some people don't want to buy this stuff. It's quite expensive, but it lasts a long time. They make it out of graphite, pencil lead, but on more expensive guitars, you tend to find that they have graphite or Graphtec nuts and saddles, which don't require it. If it's plastic, then you definitely will need some sort of lubricant in there, help your tuning stability. Okay, well, we'll come back when we've done all 6 strings and show you what happens next. Okay, so this is what it looks like when we've finished it. Now, there is a thing called a Luthiers knot where you sort of wrap the string over the top of itself and all that. I know how to do it, but I never bother because 3 or 4 winds around the post is perfectly enough to hold the string in place. Of course, we haven't cut them off yet. There's only a couple of winds around that 4th string, but they're not in tension yet. There'll be at least another wind, maybe more, once we've got it in tension. So we just put the strings on just enough to hold them in place. They're not tight. Don't want to tighten them up yet. We want to stretch them a bit as well. Okay, so what we need to notice is that the strings are wound on the inside of the tuning pegs, shall we say. That's towards the bulk of the headstock, and not on. They don't come up the outside and wind round that way. They come up the inside and wind round that way. You might like to think of it, if you're looking from the tuning peg side, then the strings are furthest away, on the furthest away side of the tuning pegs from you. We can put it that way. And don't forget, the top 2 strings in this case on this guitar have to go underneath this string tree, which has got a big long stretch there, so that holds them a bit more stable and it gives them a better break angle over the nut. So you want to get those under there before you put any tension on the strings. Alright, well, it's time to tune up now. So now the strings are quite slack. Some people would say tune up in a balanced way. So we start with the middle strings, like the 4th string, for example. If you can see that, I'm not going to tune it all the way up to D. I'm going to tune it to C, which is a couple of steps below tune. And I'm going to try the 3rd string, that should be a G. So I'm going to tune it to an F, which is a little bit low. I'll maybe try the 2nd string now, that should be a B. So I'll just tune it to an A. Doesn't have to be exact. I'm just creeping up on the tune. Try the 5th string now. That should be an A, so I'm just going to tune it to a G, F sharp. I don't know if you can see that very well. Tunes don't work very well when there's light shining on them. I'll try the bass string. That's an E, so I'll tune it to D, C sharp, D. There you go. And I'll try the top string, which is also E. Should know this by now. I'll tune that up to D as well. Okay, so now we're tuned about a whole step low. Now the neck's going to be bending as the tension comes on the string, so it's not going to be stable. The strings are stretching too. So we'll just go through it all again. I'll start from the top this time, because tuning the top string tends to affect the bass string more than tuning the bass string affects the top string, if that makes any sense. So maybe I'll go right to tune this time. Could go to D sharp, but I'll go right to E. Okay, there we go. And this time I'm not bothered about balance tuning, I'm just going to go through them. There's A sharp and B. There we go. There's G, F sharp, and G. I've got C, C sharp. Doesn't show flats this tuner. Your tuner probably might, but most of them just show sharps. That's D. I'm going a little bit far, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to stretch the strings. G sharp and A, and then my bass string. I'm now tuned to E. Okay, so I've gone a bit far there. It's F, but it doesn't matter because again I'm going to stretch the strings. Yeah, so now we need to stretch the strings a little bit and get them settled in. So just pull not too hard, don't go crazy. Just go right along the string, just giving it a little stretch, pull it off the fingerboard. Go along each string. Do that. It still won't completely take all the stretch out of the strings. They'll keep stretching for maybe a day or two, and you'll have to keep retuning, and then it'll stabilize after that. And but be careful when you're tuning up from slack strings that you don't try and tune them up too far and go to the next octave. If you've got another guitar or an instrument that can actually play you a note, then play that note and try and compare the note with it. Start from the bass string, you won't go too far wrong. You can't really tune the bass string an octave too high, but I have seen people start from the top string, try and tune it up to high E. Of course it snaps before you get there, so be careful. Now that we've stretched the strings, we need to tune again, and we'll get a little bit more accurate this time. So now we're happy that the strings are not slipping, the tuning's kind of stabilising a little bit. It's time to cut these spare bits of string off. I always leave them on just in case. Sometimes you find they are slipping, and then if you've got some spare string you can always unwind them, do them again. So slide the cutter up. You can use a pair of pliers or anything else. Slide the cutter up to the tuning peg, cut them as short as possible, and you don't cut through the actual string, of course. A bit silly, rather alarming. Again, this is where the handy string winder gadget multi-tool comes in. Just pop them off like that. Keep the ends as short as you can. And there you go. And all we have to do is put the plate back on, the strap back on, and retune yet again. And we've got a newly stringed guitar. So there it is, looking and sounding rather splendid. However, when you restring an electric guitar, it's very important to set it up again. The strings will change how the thing plays, and I'm going to do this in a separate video because it's quite a process. We need to check how high the strings are over the nut. We need to check what's called the neck relief. The neck has to have a bow like this backwards, so the strings will buzz. And we need to adjust the truss rod, which is under this cover here usually, not on all guitars, but we'll come to that. We also need to adjust the action at this end, how high the strings are, and also how far back and forward these saddles go. That adjusts the intonation on the guitar, and also how high the pickups are. So there's quite a few adjustments to check. I'll do a separate video about that. But if you've put the same set of strings on that you had before, if you had 9s on before and there's now 9s, it probably won't need a lot of adjustment. If you change your string gauge, it certainly will. So we'll come to that. And the next video will be about how to change the strings on an acoustic guitar, which is quite different. So see you then, guys. Thanks for watching.